Hi everybody, Joe Chaffee on this Wednesday night, the 6th of February 2019, and welcome to my YouTube channel. It's been a pretty interesting day watching weather models come in and go out, and new weather models coming in, and I know everybody's already looking at the late afternoon parallel GFS, so we'll talk about it a bit later on. First things first, though, we have a very busy weather night tonight with a lot of advisories and warnings, and we'll go right to that. And we're even going to have the we're going to look at the Storm Prediction Center's risk for severe weather, because we have that going on as well. But here it is, and it looks like, again, it's the central and northern plains, and particularly up into the upper Midwest, the western part of the Great Lakes, and this large area where we've got winter storm warnings up for the northern half of Wisconsin, the upper peninsula of Michigan, the northwestern part of the lower peninsula. Warnings up for eastern and northern Minnesota. We've got a little curve there of blizzard warnings in southeastern North Dakota, the western part of Minnesota, down to about the Iowa state line, and also a small portion of northeastern South Dakota. I love when I have to do the north of a south area and a south of a north area. It's really easy to get this stuff messed up. Ice storm warnings again, this time for southeastern Kansas, cutting right across the state of Missouri on a diagonal there into the northeastern corner, and into southeastern Iowa. Winter weather advisories surrounding all of that. We also have some winter storm warnings back out into the mountains of Colorado and Wyoming, some winter weather advisories there, and into parts of Utah. The west is quiet. We have wind issues down in New Mexico and West Texas with this low that is coming out, and flood watches for Kentucky, western West Virginia, much of southern Ohio, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, and southeastern Missouri. We also have winter weather advisories. Let's not forget, around the lake shores of Lake Ontario, and also throughout upstate New York and Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, extending down into northern Connecticut north of Route 84, and on up into the great state of Maine. So a pretty busy warnings, watches, and advisories map from the Weather Service, and we are also going to take a look at the prospects for severe weather, because we do have a slight risk of severe weather being indicated from northernmost Texas, or northeastern Texas, I think is probably the better description, to southeastern Oklahoma, across the northern half of the state of Arkansas, into parts of northwestern Tennessee and westernmost Kentucky, and that's all encased in a larger area of marginal risk running from northeast Texas northeastward into the Ohio Valley. You see that precip up in the northeast. Of course, that is moving into some colder air in upstate New York, and they're getting some freezing rain from that. So let's go to the satellite loop. We're going to try to get a lot of the current weather done in the first 10 or 15 minutes. And then those of you who want to really get into the forecast end of it and the longer range, you will, of course, stick around for that. But here's the satellite tonight, and there's a fairly strong feed of tropical moisture coming across Baja Peninsula into Mexico, and then picking up some Gulf moisture, shooting it up toward the Great Lakes. You've got two distinct systems here. The one that's moving through the northeast now, and then the second one that is revving up for the Midwest and the Ohio Valley for later tonight and for Thursday. That is going to eventually drive a cold front into the eastern part of the United States. Still got a little bit of moisture out there hanging out in the west, but again, much of the activity now, much of the storminess shifting eastward. The west coast, which has been the brunt of a lot of action the last 4 or 5 days, getting a bit of a break today, and the break should last a bit longer before things start to go downhill again there, as more action starts to come in into the western part of the United States. And with respect to the Weather Prediction Center's rainfall forecast for the next week, We've got some big amounts here. Now, a lot of this is, some of this is front-end driven, and some of it is back-end driven with all the activity. It's going to be a busy stretch here going into the middle part of next week. So we're seeing some big rainfall amounts in parts of Tennessee on the order of 4 or 5 inches plus, and into southern Kentucky, 1 to an inch and a half to maybe 2.5 inches for the Northeast. Also back through the Ohio Valley. Not so much in Florida. Kind of tails off a bit down in Florida, and along the immediate Gulf Coast, it lessens considerably. And then it looks like we're going to get a firing up of precip out in California again, in central and northern California, northward into Oregon, and a little bit less in terms of rain as you head up into the state of Washington. So it's kind of an active 7-day period that we're getting into, especially with that deep trough in the west shooting all this energy across the United States. Always a lot of fun watching these weather patterns in the wintertime as they evolve and change and go forward. So let's bring up the first map tonight, which is going to be the current map, the current surface map. I've got the 21Z, which is the last one that's available, and the dividing line there with the low in southern West Virginia, a warm front that extends down into coastal Virginia. The temperatures in the Carolinas in the 70s. So you got some pretty warm air. We're getting closer to that time of year where you're going to see these, really, really big temperature contrasts going on as the Gulf states begin to warm up, and you still have these cold intrusions coming down from Canada. So you've got a widespread area of 70s with 60s plus dew points across much of the Gulf states. And in Florida, we're looking at temperatures that were also in the upper 70s and low 80s, with the dew points actually not too unreasonable here. The dew points in Florida down in the 50s. So it's still a little bit on the dry side along the coast here, along the Atlantic coast. But then you start to go inland and north, and you start to see these dew points, 70 temperatures in the mid-70s, dew points in the low to mid-60s. So you've got some tropical air that's getting involved in saturating the atmosphere a bit. Jump on the other side of the front, and you've got low 40s, 30s, 20s, teens, and then head up into the Dakotas. We start seeing single digits and numbers below 0. So this is another cold high that's building down. The way the upper trough is set up in general really does favor the Great Lakes region, the western Great Lakes, to pretty much get pounded one after another with these systems, even after that brief warm-up break that they had from the Arctic air mass that came down and pulled out. But with the trough so far to the west, it benefits the winter weather lovers that are up in this part of the country, with the winter storm warnings that we have, the blizzard warnings, and so on. It all totally makes sense. And you can see the lows that are kind of stacked around into the Rockies, and then the snaking frontal boundary that runs almost across the entire country. I mean, it just you could trace it from the warm front back into southern Virginia, and then run it into the middle Mississippi Valley, loop it around back through Texas, and then on up the Colorado Rockies, and then even further north through into southwestern Canada. And on the other side, as we said, it's chilly, but it's quiet, not much activity going on rain-wise. With what's on the radar in California and on the west coast, it's pretty quiet. But the action tonight, first off, in the northeast, and this is mostly rain. However, you head up in upstate New York, mainly as you get close to I-90 and northward. Then you start to see some freezing rain and sleet out of this, and that's moving eastward. And we also have, it's all rain back here through Pennsylvania. This is all starting to come in now across New Jersey and Long Island as well. And further to the west, you've got the heavier showers and now some thunderstorms that are starting to pop up in the severe weather risk area. So be advised, if you are watching this from this particular area, where we showed you where the severe weather risk is. It is 7:13 Eastern time, and that's the radar you're seeing at the moment. So you'll be watching this on the replay. Be sure to check for the latest watches and warnings by going to your local National Weather Service office website, and you can get to it by just going to weather.gov. You want to make sure you have all the latest weather information. Now, in the colder air, as this starts to rev up, you're going to start to see a gradual expansion of sleet and freezing rain and snow. You're seeing a little bit of it now in northwestern Illinois and in eastern Iowa, southwestern Wisconsin. So all of this is just going to gradually expand as we go through the night. And as far as ice is concerned, here is the forecast for ice on the order of up to 1/4 of an inch or more in a narrow band there through central Missouri and again into parts of Wisconsin, around the Madison, the city of Madison. I think that's a 0.36. And we're looking at a point, I think that's a 1, sorry, let me clear my glasses here, 0.15 for Milwaukee. Chicago is just on the edge of this, so they're just outside this area. And mostly 1/4 of an inch ice amounts all the way up the eastern part of Michigan, of Wisconsin, along the Lake Michigan shorefront, where you've got that 1/4 of an inch or higher ice amounts all the way up to about Green Bay. In the Northeast, the ice has, it's a little less than earlier forecast. They've kind of scaled it back a bit, and I think this has to do with the fact that there is some cold air, but the cold push that was supposed to come down overnight and today was very underwhelming overall. So I think with less cold air, the icing threat is diminished. So we're looking at icing up to maybe, most areas are getting between 0.05 and 1/10. You've got a few pockets that are showing about 1/4 of an inch, but that should be about it. So that at least is good. Whenever you see the ice forecast being reduced, that is definitely a good thing. Snow is going to be really a minimal factor in the Northeast on the order of 1 to 3 inches. This is through Saturday, by the way. So this is not coming from the system that's moving through tonight, but once the Midwest low moves eastward and brings a cold front to the East Coast, once that gets into the east, it's from that you'll probably see some of this back edge snow that's being indicated on the order of 1 to 3 inches across the near the lake shore, the lake front, a little bit of lake effect action probably, and on up through New Hampshire and Maine. But you go back into the upper Midwest, where we've got a lot of these winter storm warnings up and the blizzard warnings up. You're looking at some 1 foot plus amounts in northern Wisconsin and through the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then through a small patch there in northern Minnesota. Where we've got the blizzard warnings up, the forecast snow amounts are only for about 3 to 6 inches. So it's not like they're getting 1 to 2 feet here. But as we've said, it's with blizzard warnings, it's about visibility, and it's about wind, and it used to be even about temperature. But it's visibility and wind. So if it's not snowing hard enough to restrict visibilities to under 1/4 of a mile, you're probably going to see, there's going to be definitely a lot of blowing snow getting involved. Not too much in terms of the snow amounts in the Rockies, a couple of inches here over the next several days, but you start to see the revving up of snows going into this weekend in the Sierra Nevadas and on northward up through California, and then finding its way all the way up into Oregon and Washington State. The deep trough in the west makes things pretty cold out there in the west and favorable for some snow in areas and elevations lower than what they usually are. So we'll be looking out for that. In the meantime, here's the GFS. This is the latest run of the GFS, and we'll show you what's happening here. Is you've got 2 systems, a weak one in the Northeast, and here comes your low that's going to be bringing snows up into the upper Midwest. You notice how they see the gradual expansion of snow across Iowa, Nebraska, and through Minnesota and Wisconsin. And there's that ice, which is being indicated with the ice storm warning. Low pressure up in northern Illinois tomorrow afternoon. Here in the east, in my neck of the woods, the rain is going to be done, I think, before daybreak. And we're just going to be sitting tomorrow waiting for a warm front to come through, which means we'll be in a lot of clouds and it'll be damp and dreary, a wind coming in from off the ocean until the warm front goes by sometime tomorrow night. And there might be some showers. I tend to think they'll be more numerous as you go north into New England. Little back edge snow there being indicated by the GFS. But as far as where I am on Long Island, back to about New York City, northeastern PA southward, there might be a couple of showers early Friday morning, maybe a brief run to 60 degrees until the cold air really starts to come in. And here we have this next high that is coming in for the weekend, which looks dry and cold for Saturday and for much of Sunday. Now, we just saw, we're going to shift our attention now at this point. We'll start talking about the longer range. So let me just back up here for a moment. And here's a situation where you have two pieces here, this lead piece and the second piece. And we're sort of setting it up the same way again for early next week. There is the lead piece of energy that comes into the west and fires up some snows once it gets to the other side of the Rockies. You can see it here for Sunday afternoon. So that is some warm advection that's running ahead of the next high that is coming down. So you got this high that comes down for Saturday with a cold shot, and an approaching front. Probably will be a little wave on that front for Sunday, and then another cold high that builds down into Minnesota. And meanwhile, you've got the big snow setting up for California again with trailing energy behind it. When this comes through Sunday night into Monday morning, I think there's a chance that we could see an area of generally a coating to maybe an inch or two. If it's hard to really pick out, but there is just the weakest of waves here. So it might, I noticed on the GFS and on a couple of models, kind of enhancing the precip a little bit along the coast. And I'm grasping at straws here, folks. We're talking about the difference between 0.05 and 1/10 of an inch to maybe 0.15 to 0.2. So somebody might wind up maybe with a surprise inch or two out of it. That would be the maximum extent. And then after that, the high builds in. You've got this frontal boundary that's going to be stalled across the Gulf states. So now you're going to bring in this energy from the west and start the next process with a low that is going to, well, at least according to the operational GFS and what some of the other models have shown today, winds up cutting pretty hard to the Great Lakes. Now there is a secondary low here that forms on a coastal front off the North Carolina, Virginia coast. And sometimes, in certain situations, you can see that secondary basically become the primary low. The primary low that's out to the west falls apart and all the energy gets transferred to the secondary, and that traps cold air in. But when you look at this surface, at least the way the GFS operational sees this, that's not going to happen. Okay, you're probably going to have some kind of low that does form offshore, but that primary on the GFS is so wrapped up and heads up into the northern lakes. This is at best a little snow at the start in Virginia and through Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and then quickly goes over to rain Tuesday night. It rains into early Wednesday afternoon, and then done. Meanwhile, there'll be some heavier snows in Nebraska, through Minnesota, into northern Wisconsin again, and on up into the upper peninsula of Michigan as the lows keep seeming to want to go up into northern Michigan. So why is it doing this? If you were here yesterday, we discussed the models in how they were, interacting with all the different puzzle pieces here, and I'm showing you the upper air going to Wednesday. Well, let's back up. Okay, so we do get what we get Thursday into Friday. Of course, you get this cold shot. There's an upper low there in southeastern Canada. Now, if you recall, we talked about that becoming a strong storm out in the Atlantic, and it was going to at least keep the ridge flat in the eastern part of the United States. And it does do that to some degree during the day Monday. The problem is that if we look out west, You've got the approaching deep energy in the southern part of this jet stream sitting in Utah. There's a short wave that is up along the Canadian border. What the models do, what the models have been doing is, instead of taking this system that's in the south and kind of just sort of pushing it along almost straight east, keeping the streams at least separate enough where the southern part of that energy winds up going more toward, say, southern Michigan, Ohio, and into western New York. This would take a surface low and just kind of sneak it underneath all the cold air that's in the northeast. But the models are actually trying to phase it somewhat with this northern energy, so it winds up lifting toward the Great Lakes. This is why you have this idea of a strengthening primary. And that is what the GFS showed. The European today, I'll give you a close-up view of the European, which kind of followed the same notion with this, maybe slightly less, but it's the same principle. Let me get to the wider one. Here's how it looks on the upper air on the European. And your upper low is, there's your upper trough, and then it gets caught by this northern energy. See, on the European, it's trying to show this idea where it sort of slips underneath, taking something perhaps up to the Great Lakes, but maybe a little bit further east than what the GFS did. It still ultimately winds up being the same thing. And there's a couple of things here with respect to the European that I'm not 100% sold on. So here's your low up north and west of St. Louis. Here's your secondary low that is sitting off the North Carolina coast. You've got your high in southern Quebec trying to wedge down along the coastline. The European has a wrapped up primary in eastern Lake Huron, but it also has a fairly wrapped up secondary in southeastern Massachusetts. I really don't know how feasible this is, okay? Given the fact that where the upper support is and where the mean trough position is, which is out in the west, and you've got mostly a ridge here in the east, it's kind of hard for me to envision where you're going to have a secondary that's going to really blow up. Now, on to the parallel, because I know you guys are all clamoring to see the parallel. What makes the parallel tonight different? I got to tell you, I am really starting to wonder whether this model is of any use. But here's the big difference in the parallel GFS, and I think it's a little on the far-fetched side. The models are pretty even here going into Monday. And you see that southern energy, and this is where I think the parallel might be incorrect. It really kind of drops it pretty far south into New Mexico, and it undercuts the ridge. This is what we talked about yesterday. Having that energy separate itself from where the trough is in the plains, the northern part of the trough just kind of goes about its merry way. The whole southern part of the trough just undercuts that ridge that's up in eastern Canada, and then you've got it. This is the other part I don't necessarily believe, the way it strengthens this as it approaches the east coast. And this is why the parallel GFS, in case you haven't seen it, I'll show it to you. I almost feel for the snow lovers here, because it's as if they've had every model, one by one, every model has gone where it's taken away the threat for a sizable snowfall in the eastern part of the U.S., and now the parallel GFS is the only one that's left. It's got to be very frustrating. So there's your coating to an inch for Monday night. For Sunday night into early Monday, and then here comes that southern energy, and look at where the parallel GFS has this Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock. 1,003 low in northern Mississippi, and if we go back I'm going to switch to the regular GFS for the same time frame. There's your low in northwest Kansas, How many miles is that from northern Mississippi to northwest Kansas in terms of a difference? But again, this is because of the fact that the model, the GFS, and also the Canadian to a lesser extent, the European to a slightly lesser extent, lifting that upper trough up well to the west, and that takes that strong primary. But back to the parallel, and look at that. I mean, a solid ice storm in North Carolina and in Southwest Virginia. Your low goes into central Tennessee, into central Kentucky. The primary dies out here. The secondary completely takes over. So there's your primary low, is that 998 low in central Kentucky. You've got a coastal front here that extends up along the Carolina coast. You see the isobars off along the North Carolina coast, kind of like a finger pushing out to the northeast, getting all stretched out. A new low center will form in there, and there it is, right near Wilmington by next Wednesday morning. And of course, at this point, we've got it snowing heavily through southern New Jersey up to about New York City and southern Pennsylvania. Ice from Washington, D.C. southward. A deep low sitting just off the Delaware coast. And then you've got this wrapped up 987 low just east of the Delmarva Peninsula by next Wednesday night. And still sitting out there early Thursday morning. I mean, this is just insane. It really is. This would, in my view, kind of defy everything that we've seen so far this winter. It really just goes against everything that's there. It goes against the overall upper pattern. The upper pattern is trough in the west, ridge in the east scenario. And I think what the possibility where you have a weaker system that undercuts everything, I think you can make a case for that, and we may still see models move things around for another day or so before we finally see where they zero in on a solution here. But to have this sort of over-amplified look on the parallel GFS, to me, is just it's just insane. Look at the deep trough out in the west. I mean, you're going to want to have the heights come up here in the east. So it's hard to envision how this energy here is not going to phase and head up toward the western Great Lakes. But then again, we're still at the point when you run all these ensembles and everything else, and you look at the individual members. I'm sure there are a few solutions that have this idea in mind. I just think it's so, at least from the evidence that I've seen at the moment, I find it incredibly unrealistic to have that as an outcome. Now, I haven't looked at it, but let's take a look. Let's go out longer range and see if we see any kind of change in all of this. I mean, it's just such a mess. It really is. I mean, this is just a mess everywhere. All kinds of short waves running around. There's, at least on the parallel GFS, still no, we get a couple of runs a day where it does show blocking at the end of the period. It never happens. It just doesn't. Just let's check out the Pacific. Can we do that on this? No, we can't. We have to go to the regular. We can check out the Atlantic, though. And at least, remember, the big problem in the Atlantic is that there's been this fire hose of a jet across the Atlantic with very little going on, just an absolute absence of storms. You finally get this deep trough off of between Newfoundland and southern Greenland, which helps to pop the ridge up a bit in the east, and there's your system that undercuts the ridge on the parallel GFS. I just honestly, I think that's just so unrealistic. Let's look at the Pacific on the GFS side. And here you go. And you got a split flow out here. You can see, there's this ridging that goes up into the Gulf of Alaska, troughing that runs down to Hawaii, troughing off the west coast, ridge on the other side of the international date line toward the Aleutians. And you got that spinning upper low north of Hawaii that just sits there. You still have, the trough wanting to drop down into the western part of the U.S., at least as of 2:34. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You know, you get a bit of polar flow, a little bit of a polar intrusion around day 12, 13, or 13, 14, but then that lifts right out. I mean, it just, it's hard to get bullish with this. It just really is for the longer haul. And look, here it is again, blocking. Okay. This is, you know, I've seen this has got to be the umpteenth time in the last month where at least 1 or 2 runs a day shows a blocking high trying to build up over the North Atlantic, over Greenland. Okay, prove it to me. Really, you're going to have to prove this to me, because it becomes really an exercise in futility where you start that the model always seems to want to do that in its long-range outlook, and it never happens. It never gets there. Oh, boy. So, anyhow, I think that pretty much kind of explains where we are at this point today. We're not really that much further along than yesterday. I think we're just at a different sense of a different level of frustration. But again, I would look for models to do a little more adjusting. I would also look for the parallel GFS to kind of lose that idea in the next run. I just don't see it happening. All right, so I'm going to come to the chat board. Let me just, by the way, because a point was made on my Facebook page by one of my regulars, Ron Pinelli, great guy, and you know he made a convincing argument. I just want to correct something. You know, when I talk about, you know, kind of on and off doing a little bit of snow weenie bashing, I don't want to admit, I should be a little, I should be more specific. I'm not directing that at average snow lovers, of which I'm one, okay? And I know many of you are, and I'm certainly not directing that at you. I was directing directing it to some folks who, you know, if I put up a post that even implies that, well, maybe the winter is what it is, and we're not going to have many more chances, if any chances at all, for snow between now and mid-March, judging by how the pattern is looking. I'm not, you know, necessarily espousing that, but if I even imply that, I, you know, get attacked, and kind of get attacked in a pretty vicious way, and I just get really annoyed. So I'm really directing it at folks that seem to be so wrapped up in all of this that they get so highly emotional over frozen, basically crystallized frozen water that comes out of the sky. You know, let's take it down a notch and just relax a little bit. It's snow. If it's a subpar winter, what can you do? That's how it works. I think hopefully this is a lesson to folks who, you know, you get every year it's the same thing. Sometimes it starts in September, but it definitely gets underway in October. This sort of endless chanting about the upcoming winter and the epic nature that it's going to be. Every winter since I've started doing this now 5 years with regards to social media, when I started my Facebook weather page back in 2013, every year I've noticed every year, no matter what the weather pattern is, what the patterns are, no matter, you know, what's going on in the Pacific or in the Atlantic or up in the North Atlantic or in the Arctic region, every winter is going to be an epic winter. And guess what? Some winters just aren't that way. In fact, almost all of them are not epic winters, except for the one winter every maybe 10 or 20 years that winds up being quote-unquote epic. Okay? When that endless chanting starts up again in September and October, don't be surprised. I think those of you who have been here on this channel, and I love all you guys and gals, you're all terrific. I think you're on here and you know it better. You're going to know better than to pay attention to any of that stuff, and rather take the approach of letting the pattern just kind of evolve on its own and let it take you down a journey. This way you don't really have to worry about things more than a week or so at a time going forward. Yeah, I just really think that is the best approach in how to handle weather and how you see it. So I've gotten a request, speaking of long range, so David wants me to bring up the teleconnections, and indeed, and remember, no magic bullets here, okay? You've got all these acronyms out there, the NAO, the EPO, the PNA, the SOI, and the WPO, and on and on and on it goes. And you know what? There are no magic bullets in all of this. You know, we look at these teleconnection indices, and they're pretty interesting. The one that I like to pay attention to is the EPO. I think that negative EPO is a strong player here with that reading that is very, very strongly negative. What I usually like to get them down, when they get down to minus 400 or lower, I call them off. That's like off the wall negative. It's almost there by around the 10th of February, and then you have a gradual increase toward the 20th, but still saying negative. So this is at least favors cold air spreading out across southern Canada and coming into the eastern states under the right conditions. The Pacific North America Index, which basically gives you a measure of the strength of the of a trough in the east, ridge in the west, or the reverse. When it's negative like this, you've got the trough out in the west and the ridge in the east, and you can see this is really off the wall negative going into the middle part of next week. So it's kind of signaling to you just how dominant that trough in the west is at the point that all this energy is trying to come eastward. That's why it seems, that's why that parallel GFS solution seems so far-fetched, because it really flies in the face of a very, very strong, you know, trough in the west, trough in the Rockies type of thing, and a ridge in the eastern part of the United States. That's not a scenario that usually winds up bringing big snows to the mid-Atlantic and into the Northeast. And of course the NAO, which has really been kind of just sitting quietly, it's slightly positive, it's weekly positive right through the next the next 16 days. So you know, it's not even down in, if it could be a weekly negative, it probably would have had some impact. It's weekly positive, so it's probably not having a huge amount of impact, but it doesn't help the argument of trying to bring a system into the eastern part of the United States. I would just point out, though, on the teleconnections here is the rapid ascent of the PNA around the 10th or 11th, and you see how quickly it goes all the way up to the neutral line. So it suggests, at least on the ensembles, it suggests that there will be a change around the 18th, 20th. Now, whether it's something that's temporary or not, and whether it might even be there on the next run, I don't know. This is all based on the 0Z run from last night. So if the models might have been adjusting in the areas that the PNA is measured, you might come up with different readings if you use, say, the 12Z or the 18Z, but they only do this once a day. But that rapid ascent from that strongly negative figure to the neutral line, so around the date of the 19th, 20th of February, might be where we might look for something to happen there storm-wise somewhere. We have what we're dealing with in this deeply negative area for the middle part of next week. But again, we're going to watch that area up here, that rapid ascent that occurs starting from February 12th and then getting up to the neutral line around the 20th. Assuming that tomorrow, when we look at that, it's still there, because it's likely to change to some degree. So the teleconnections not exactly, you know, giving us a big encouraging view of snow chances for the I-95 stretch from Washington to New York City to about Philadelphia. Okay, the Gulf Stream. You know what, David? I haven't really had a chance to pay attention to that, so I can't pull it up now. But I'll make a note of it and address it tomorrow as far as what's going on with that. William Hooper, when am I doing a library seminar on Long Island? It's been a while. I've got nothing booked, so none of the libraries have booked me back. I've done most libraries twice, so they haven't asked me yet. But something will come along at some point. And as soon as that happens, I'll let you know. Mary Daniels, by the way, thank you. I think you mentioned about belated Happy Weatherman's Day from yesterday, and I appreciate that. What puts you ahead of the game is that you're not pressured to scream clickbait viewers headlines that hypes the weather you're passionate. Thank you very much. That's what I try to do. It's just kind of give a straightforward view of what's happening. You know, I've always said, you know, if I ever get nervous about a system, that's the time to worry, because I have, you know, the only times that I've gotten nervous were right before hurricane, you know, the days before Hurricane Sandy. That was the first time with the hurricane that I was, you know, concerned, and the other time was during the Snowmageddon storm in my area back in 2013, where I got 30 inches of snow in about 10 hours time. So if I worry, then worry. But so except for that, I seldom worry. Okay. Rick 8013, Valentine's Day rain and thunderstorms in the southeast, going for low 80s tomorrow. I know, isn't that insane? I'm so envious, by the way, the weather of the last couple of days with temperatures up into the 60s. I was outside and I'm thinking, you know, maybe it'd be nice if this would just go away. The winter would go away and bring on some warmer weather. But we still have some work to do time-wise. Let's see. Judah Cohen, Twitter. The one way the parallel GFS is an absolutely better model than the GFS. When I'm depressed because of lack of snow, the parallel produces a much better fantasy snowfalls. Absolutely correct. So why am I throwing out Peter Bicker, the parallel, while it seems to be the most consistent model? I mean, the 0Z showing a completely different scenario from last night. Because I think the parallel is just, it doesn't fit the scheme of the upper pattern that we have. What it evolved into, it just seems totally far-fetched and kind of goes against the dominating nature of the very, very deep trough in the west and the tendency for ridging in the east. Now look, that all being said, if you look, I didn't get a chance to look at all these different spaghetti plots that are around. I was trying to dig some up and then I lost track. But I did see some posts around, people putting up some of the ensemble tracks of the jet stream pattern in the west, for example, up in the northwest, going out 7 days from now. And the amount of variability in what was being shown was insane. And I think the reason, you know, you've got all this stuff going on, and there's always puzzle pieces and chess pieces, but I think there's so much going on in so many different areas on the Pacific side, up in the northwest, and in the west, that you're getting these models to do these sort of, you know, flips back and forth, storms not just moving but literally jumping from one specific point to another, from run to run. I think we may still see that. Look, all I'm saying is the parallel GFS, from what it produced late this afternoon, it just seems totally, it just doesn't seem to fit the scheme of what's going on. Now, I still think there's a chance we could go back to the operational run of the GFS from late yesterday, Peter, where we saw something kind of undercut the ridging and basically just kind of, you know, slide right across. I think that's possible. I think that's still possible. I just think this overdeveloped hype, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the model itself is hyping it, but that overdeveloped look that the parallel GFS had late this afternoon just seems just so far-fetched. David Allen from the UK. Last week was the coldest in 7 years in the UK, below 5 Fahrenheit last Thursday. Wow. We only have 13 inches of rain since May 1st, January 31st. The average is 20. Can I take a look at the weather in Europe, please? Okay. I did notice yesterday, David, that the cold pattern was taking a break for the most part in Europe. So we'll switch over here. So let's look at what the upper air looks like. And we do have, you know, one of the big problems you've had is that you had this big ridge that was sitting out over Western Europe and over England and Ireland for the longest time. Now, you do have shortwave troughs that are moving through at the end of the week and in through the weekend. Some pretty strong activity there in the upper air. Then you get another big ridge that builds early next week and hangs there through most of next week. Much of the colder air is going to be out to the east of you. Look at that. You've got a huge upper blocking high up in Siberia, and then another ridge that just kind of that builds northward from Africa on up into England and Spain. I'm sorry, England and France and Spain. And you're still in a ridge position here. That's impressive. Let's see what it means for the day-to-day weather. Starting with, all right, so you got some rain in here for tonight. And there's your big storm. You got a pretty strong gale there that goes up just north of Ireland and almost reaches the coast of Scotland. That's a 950 pressure, so I imagine the gradient's got to be really tight. Let me look at the 10-meter wind. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Yeah, you've got 40 to 50 knot winds there up along the coast of Northern Ireland and reaching into northwestern Scotland. That's a pretty wrapped up gale center that's coming in for Thursday into Friday, and that will at least give you some rain and a little bit of snow on the backside. But then after that, you're going to get dry again for a while because the Atlantic kind of gets shut off, and with that upper high building over the top, it looks cold and dry through much of interior, central, and eastern Europe. Is that snow lifting up? That's another one of these Mediterranean systems. They're always fascinating to watch. So you're going to get your storminess now, but it looks like the pattern in the longer haul is going to get pretty dry again for you guys over in England and Ireland and in Scotland. Let's quickly look at Southeast Canada and take a look here. And we've got, let me make that date visible here. Maps courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com, by the way, so this should be your go-to place to go look at weather maps, folks. He's got good stuff there, Levi Cowan does. All right, so by Friday, we've got some rain for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. You can see this Labrador low running up to the northeast. So this is going to be that system that drops down east of Labrador and goes into the Atlantic. So we finally have some kind of an Atlantic gale center out there, and it takes a while for it to get out of the way. This is still next Tuesday that it's still here. So that's partly the key to what's going on in the east. And of course, here comes that the midweek system for next week, which, if it's a Great Lakes storm, means mostly rain for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, unless there's a little snow at the start. Another gale center with some wind here over Newfoundland, less so for Nova Scotia, but a pretty strong gale center between Labrador and Greenland later next week. And, you know, after that, we're kind of into day 9 and 10, so who knows if that's where we're going to be, if it's going to actually look that way, or at that point we're going to start to see some radical changes. So I think that pretty much covers it. I'm just trying to run back. Let's see. Oh, Johnny Quest, you got, okay. I want to read it though. Okay, it's just nonsense. All right. The flat Earth is rotating on is wobbling on its axis. Okay, very good. Cullen, FV3 seems to have the frontal boundary consistently south in comparison to other models. Total outlier, but that storm would be awesome. as Judith said, the parallel GFS does produce much better fantasy snowstorms than the regular GFS. All right, so let's we're going to wrap it up here at this point. Really quick, for those of you who are interested, you want more weather, you got to join my Patreon platform for just $2 a month. It's a lot of fun. A lot of folks are on it. They're enjoying it. Great conversation taking place. And also, you get live streams just for Patreon members. We did one this morning. And if we do have a storm threat, you'll definitely get one on the mornings, the days before the storms leading up to it. There's posts on there that are not on my website. And there's a few other things that you can do, including messaging me at any time with any questions or comments. So the link is up there. It's just $2 a month, and it does go a long way to help support not just what I'm doing here with the live streams, but I have a free weather app that is available and is useful for any area in the country. You can just put in your own location to get your local forecast and local weather conditions for Android or iPhones. It's for all mobile devices. So the link is also there on the chat board. Tonight we will have a Joe and Joe weather show at about 9:25. So be sure to tune in for that on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Otherwise, you can watch it on the app when I upload it tomorrow morning, or you can watch it right here on YouTube. And that really, I think, covers it. Okay? Thanks, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate it. Have a great evening. Be safe in your travels, and we will talk to you tomorrow.